All right. Well, we have a special guest on the show today, Mr. DJ Hughes. And DJ, I've known your wife for a very long time. Obviously, she is the reason for your success. But I really appreciate you having you on the show. I'm sure you're going to talk a lot about her, but we'll probably dive into some other topics of leadership too. So thank you for being here, DJ.
I appreciate it, and you're 100% correct. All honesty, and I probably wouldn't be able to do half the things I've done career-wise if not for Mandy. So,
Love
100%
it,
correct.
love it. Well, I'm going to read a little bit about your background, DJ, and I've told you this, and I told your wife this too. But holy smokes, like this is pretty dang impressive. So a little bit of background here for listeners, but you grew up in Chicago and enlisted in the United States Army Reserve as a chemical operations specialist. After that, you did a commission as a military intelligence officer in the Chemical Corps. You received your bachelor's degree in law enforcement and justice administration. You were on the dean's list. That was at Western Illinois. So Major Hughes officially earned his master's of business administration in strategic supply chain management from Ashford, and your project management professional certification from the Project Management Institution. Like, holy smokes, just your education alone can stand on its own as pretty impressive. But I'm just going to read a little bit too about your 19 years of military service. You served in a lot of different positions throughout active duty and reserve. You served as a nuclear, biological, chemical non-commissioned officer and supply sergeant. You were a platoon leader. You served as a gold bar recruiter. You were a battalion chemical officer, um, battalion executive officer, and currently serve as an instructor at the intermediate level of education. And this is where I really want to dive in here in a minute about being an instructor in the armed forces. I think is fascinating, and I want to hear more about the intersections or the similarities or differences between that and the private sector. DJ Major Hughes has many awards and decorations, including his Iraq Campaign Medal, his Army Commendation Medal, Army Reserves Component Achievement Medal. I mean, the list just continues to go on for you. And in your civilian capacity, you are an international operations and project management professional. You have done work in lots of places, including the United States, Europe, Middle East, Asia Pacific. I mean, this is seriously, DJ. I hope you feel proud of yourself, because this is just pretty impressive. If you're not in your 40s, you're in your late 30s still. Heck of a resume for somebody your age, well, or any age for that matter.
Thank you, Dr. Hartman. I appreciate that. Can I call you Dr. Hartman?
Hey, Lisa's just fine. I should be calling you Major Hughes, and I'm calling you DJ. So first names are fine. But thank you, DJ, for your service. And so let's just kick into when you and I were talking before the show. We were talking about trust as a component of leadership. And as I understand, you teach some courses in the military about trust. So tell me a little bit about those courses that you teach on trust.
Absolutely. So first off, thanks for having me, Lisa. I really appreciate it, and I'm very honored to be a part of this podcast. I think this is a great forum for young professionals, leaders, in any walk of life, military, civilian, any different field, to learn, to grow, and just professionally develop themselves. So thank you for having me for this, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the podcast as this continues. So in regards to ILE, as we call it, my acronyms, you'll see me throw an acronym out there. If I say something military-wise acronym, just stop me and let me know, just things. But the intermediate level education, it's what we call a PME, or primary military education, for field grade officers. And for those who don't know, field grade level is essentially the how do I put this? The sticky stuff. It's the middle management of the Army. It's the stuff in between the tactical level of military and the strategic level military. And there's some overlap sometimes in field grades, or work at a strategic level, and they'll manage units at the tactical level. So obviously, when you're making that transition from a tactical leader, or in a civilian capacity, a entry level position, into that middle management, and you have to focus on how your daily activities are affecting the big picture, that's really what ILE is all about. That's really what we do as field grades, is we make sure that the strategic objectives are being met at the operational and at the technical level, so that we can ultimately achieve our national strategic level goals. Okay, so ILE is all about teaching teaching majors how to cope with that change, how to now lead in a capacity that you may not be the direct person in charge. Most of your career as a field grade officer, you'll be on a staff where you're not directly a leader. You have to manage by influence, right? You have to lead teams of staff versus teams of what we call door kickers, guys going knocking down doors and taking names. So how do you make that transition is what we really kind of focus on. And the one thing that I've learned as I've taken on this role is it's not that different from what you do at the tactical level. You hear a lot of people say in the civilian capacity and the military capacity, leadership is leadership, right? Mm-hmm. You take orders, you take care of your subordinates, you instill a level of respect and trust. And we talk about leadership. We talk about forms of power and how you can exercise different forms of power. And one thing I like to stress with that is whether you're talking about positional power, like, hey, I'm the guy in charge and this is what I say to do, versus the reverent power that you earn through experience and respect. One's not necessarily, they're situational, one's not necessarily better or worse than the other, but you want to try to lean toward that reverent power as much as possible. And that's where experience and trust comes into play. All right. Rachel Botsman does a lot of good TED Talks on this topic, and one in particular I actually use with my students in ILE. She does a TED Talk where she really describes how we should view trust as a leap. She uses the term trust bridge. Okay, and you're trying to get from one place of a known certainty where you might be comfortable to this place where it might be a little uncertain. You're trying to fill out the new leader, fill out the new organization, the new unit. And at some point there has to be some kind of crossing or meeting in the middle, if you will. And that's that concept of the trust bridge. But trust is essential in a military capacity. As a leader at the tactical level, if I'm a lieutenant and a brand new officer, 21 years old or something, and I have to convince this 20-year vet who may be my subordinate that it's in the best interest of the mission to go in that building where he or younger soldiers may be killed, there has to be some level of respect past the positional power piece, some level of accountability and trust and respect that has to accompany that in order for them to execute those missions accordingly. At the same time, there has to be a certain level of respect, albeit a different situation if you're looking in a civilian capacity, trying to convince people to spend less time with their families to accomplish corporate goals or corporate tasks that might be out there, operational variables and things that may be factors for your organization. So we talk about all those types of things and how we can influence those and influence people to getting there to ultimately accomplish the missions.
There's so many different things that I want to ask you, because, I do want to get into at some point, like the differences, the similarities between, private and government and military, but, truly you're dealing with life and death situations. And so trust is so different, I would think in military. But the other thing that comes to mind, I think a lot of people might have perceptions that when you're in the military, power does come from positional power, that, it's it can be rough, it can be demanding. And hearing you talk is fascinating because what you just talked about is so different. It's a lot of the same principles that's leadership everywhere else. So, how does that 20-year-old who might be, leading that veteran, what are some of the strategies that you would teach them right away to help build that trust?
Well, that's actually one of the I would say one of the harder things to teach what we call junior military officers or JMOs. And the structure of the military, let me just kind of walk that dog before I answer the question here. You have three different layers, if you will, of the military. You'll have your enlisted and NCO. So these are your junior soldiers at the enlisted level, and your non-commissioned officers, NCOs, that execute the task and advise the officer corps of the military. All right. And then you have your warrant officers in the middle. These are the subject matter experts in a respective field, whether that's logistics, in my field, chemical warfare, or military intelligence, whatever. These are subject matter experts specifically trained in a field to focus really deep and give you depth of knowledge there. And then you have your officers who run the Army. Now, though, you have junior military officers from the ranks of lieutenants through captain. You have your field grades from majors through full-bird colonels, and then your generals at the strategic, higher strategic levels. Okay, so when you become a lieutenant, typically through some commissioning source like West Point or ROTC or something like that, you're right out of college. The vast majority of officers don't have prior military experience. And you walk into typically a platoon. Platoon is 40 or so soldiers that are typically led by a non-commissioned officer who can have anywhere from 15 to 20 years of service. So, and now all of a sudden you're the platoon leader, you're this leader of this group. And by regulations, by Army standards, military standards in general, you are the leader of that unit. That 20-year vet, whatever, reports to you. But it's just not that simple, as anything with leadership and people is. There is a reverence that comes with that. Now, people have different styles. And again, I'm not here to knock anybody's style, say one way is better or worse than the other. There may be situations where that lieutenant may have a reason, and he definitely has the support of the regulations to walk into the unit and say, this is my unit, this is how things are going to be. I would question how much he's going to accomplish with that type of attitude. And then you have people, and I'll speak from my experience. My first unit, I was actually still in college as a platoon leader, and I was given command of a maintenance platoon for a heavy maintenance company. Won't bore you with the details. Basically, these guys fix big things like tanks and different types of hats and trucks. And Lisa, like you said, we've known each other over almost 20 years here, and you know that I can't change a tire without calling AAA. So here I'm in charge of this. Of this maintenance unit with all these little things and maintenance stuff that I still don't know what they are. But I walk in and I'm brand new to this, and I'm terrified because we have a big mission to support a unit that's about to deploy, and I'm terrified because I want to do a good job, and I at least understood at this point in my career that, though I probably wouldn't be kicking down doors, the equipment readiness for these units that we're going to be supporting is important. If their equipment doesn't work, then they're in trouble. We have problems. So I want to do a good job. So first thing I do, I go to my platoon sergeant, and my platoon sergeant, I won't throw names out here on the podcast, but 22-year vet, staff sergeant, had been in pretty much every position in the maintenance world. He had the hands of a mechanic like my father, just, scarred over with the calluses, and he was that guy, just we call him Old Crusty, Old Crusty. But he knew every nut, bolt, screwdriver, and we're still friends today. And I went to him and I said, look, I'm new here. I don't know much about maintenance, and this is something that I'm going to need your help with traversing. And I was humble enough to do that. I've seen some leaders that may not be. I was humble enough to go in and say, look, I don't know what I don't know. Help me. And let me tell you, he took me 100% under his wing in that regards. And when I was getting missions from my commander to go accomplish something or some different types of tasks from my higher up, I'd come back and brief it down to him, and he'd be like, hey, we already got it taken care of, sir. We got you. We already took care of this. And I say all that to say this, at that point in my career, I wasn't as involved as I probably should have been, but I looked really damn good to my bosses because my team was always on top of it. They always took care of me. They always were on top of the missions. My unit was frequently number one from a metric standpoint when it came to readiness, when it came to being able to support mission effectiveness. We were always in that top 5%, and I don't attribute that to my leadership. I attribute that to his leadership, and if I had to attribute anything to me, it's being humble enough to understand if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and utilize your resources. And I've taken that even now. I have a lot more experience military wise. I mean, that was almost wow, that was 2000. Wow, I'm gonna age myself here. That's probably 2004. Wow, man. But even today, I mean, if I'm walking into a situation, I know a lot more about the military and the roles I go into now. I have a little bit more experience, but I'm still gonna seek out mentorship, and I think that's important because so often we get this mindset that your mentor can only be someone higher ranking than you that's a higher level, a higher rank, whatever it might be. And that's just not the case. I mean, I have had and I still have several mentors in both a civilian capacity and military capacity that would be quote unquote subordinate to my position, but their experience is invaluable. And I think that leaders miss opportunities when they don't take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's what a valuable story. And there's so many pieces of leadership in there that are so insightful. Even the other thing I just want to add to that too is that, that there's this very professional side of DJ who's accomplished a lot of things, but also knowing you on a personal level. I mean, you're very engaging, relational, you're funny. And so as you're telling that story, I wonder too if like that unit worked for you and you guys formed this team in part because you're able to build connections pretty quickly with people.
No, I would agree with that. I mean, I would think that's one of my strengths, and I'm humble enough to say that. I'm definitely not a technical guy. I'm not. I mean, I'm a project manager on the civilian side, and for those of you that know what project management is, it's basically making sure people do their jobs. And that's okay. It's just what you said, Lisa. I mean, my skill set is being able to relate to people and to get people to want to work for me. That's my job. That's my life. That's what I've done in my career. And I think that is important. But I think in my case, at least my experience, it's about being genuine. I wholeheartedly believe, there's this adage out there that, you fake it till you make it. I don't believe in that. I think that causes people to put on a facade, to put on a mask, if you will, and frankly, it underestimates the people that we serve as leaders. It underestimates them. It assumes that they're stupid or they can't think. It's okay to walk into a room as a leader and say, hey, look, I need some suggestions. I don't necessarily know what's going on here. Help me out. It's okay, and we have to be confident and humble enough to accept that we're not going to know everything. And you have to be genuine about that. I mean, nothing's worse. We've all had some kind of boss or manager or been in a situation where you can just tell that somebody's faking the funk. Like, why did this person get promoted? Whose nephew is that? We've all kind of been there, and it's obvious. So, if you have any genuine interest, in my opinion, in being viewed as a respectable leader, and getting people to work for you, I think it has to come from a genuine place, and as much as you can be. And there's situations as leaders, I will see that you can't necessarily be as transparent with your subordinates as you want, especially in the military. There's situations where we've had to keep things from soldiers for security reasons, and the same is applicable in a civilian capacity. But at the end of the day, transparency, trust, and being genuine, I think, will 99.9% of the time get you over the hump a lot more than trying to fake the funk.
Yeah, I mean, you've got some things in there that I think belong on a t-shirt, some little DJ phrases that we could market here. But I want to transition into your job as a civilian. So, okay, so you work a full-time job and you're also in the reserves and teach leadership through that. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so I am so curious, like what's the biggest differences between leadership within the role of the military, and then leadership as you've experienced in your civilian career?
People got to do what I tell them to do in the Army. No.
Right.
No, that's part of it. But as you know, I did transition from the military full time. I was active duty for a number of years, right after college, actually, and right, Mandy and I got married. And my first civilian career was with a company that had a strong union presence. So leadership in that setting, coming from a military setting where, even if you didn't have that reverence built up, people would still follow you and still do the job. Maybe it wasn't as enthusiastic, but they would still do the job. Going from that to an organization where it was built in to be confrontational. It was just naturally confrontational with leaders. That was a big wake-up call for me, and a big opportunity for me to learn and to grow as a leader and understand how to manage and lead through influence. And I say that very purposely. I think management and leadership, we might go there, but that's two different things. But how to manage and lead through influence, I think, was one of the biggest challenges that I picked up in that first role. And honestly, it helped me grow. I ended up ultimately leaving that company. At the time, I thought it was more of a cultural thing, that I wasn't adjusting as a leader, or not adjusting as a leader, but that I wasn't necessarily advancing the way I wanted to. And it wasn't until after I left and I stayed in contact with some mentors there that I realized it wasn't that, it was me. It was how I was approaching my job, how I was approaching tasks. I was focused more on that managerial style versus leading my teams. I focus more on metrics, and in that role, I'll give you this. I received several bonuses because my metrics were always good. I was always accomplishing the task. I was always exceeding the task. But as Mandy will tell you, because at that point we just had our first son, we just had Donovan. I was working insane. I was doing all the work myself. I wasn't bringing in the team to help me get the results. So I had this mentality in the military, and it's built in me from the military, that we will accomplish the mission. However we do it, we're going to get it done. But in the civilian capacity, it's about influencing people. It's a little more about influencing people. I will say that is still the case in the military. You definitely want to be able to influence others in order to accomplish your goal. But in the civilian capacity, that's extremely important, because there isn't necessarily a definite positional power that you can fall back on from your toolbox. So it was a huge learning curve for me, and it helped me expand my leadership toolbox and ultimately helped me in multiple roles after.
That's fascinating. I'm not going to make you answer this question, but it just reminded me of this, that we're doing interviews for a position, and hopefully nobody's going to listen that's going to interview later this week. But one of the questions I have in there is, what is the difference between manipulation and influence? And just listening to you talk, I think you probably could answer that question very well, but it's been really interesting to hear how people respond to that question. Okay, so now I'm going to switch gears. I asked you what was the biggest difference. Like, what are the biggest similarities between leadership in the military, leadership in your civilian work?
Similarity, wow. So honestly, I would say that, especially now as I look back, as I'm a little more seasoned in the military, it's very similar in the civilian capacity. And I will say, I'm obviously I'm more at a middle management level in my civilian career, and I'm there also in my military career, and those similarities are almost parallel. Actually, they're there. I would say at the tactical level, though, when dealing with junior military officers and entry level officers, an entry level position versus junior military officers, it really is just about understanding key players, understanding how to build relationships, networking. Those are definitely similarities, I think, that exist between the military and in the civilian capacity. Now, you see people think about people's mentality about the military and how it's this very rigid organization. I will say that I think that's a very it's very ignorant analysis, at least from what I've seen of the military. It is all about relationships. Let me say this again, it's all about relationships. I learned that the hard way. I mean, my junior military career was definitely less than glamorous. I love how you went through my resume, but I'll tell you, it sounds fun, but man, when I was going through it as a lieutenant, it was no fun at all. But that's honestly why I left active duty, because I didn't understand that, relationship building was important. I didn't understand. I would challenge the status quo. I mean, I born and raised in Chicago. I'm not this, I have somewhat of a chip on my shoulder being from Chicago. Right, wrong, and different. It's there. I understand that, but not understanding that you actually needed people, not necessarily realizing that I need my teams, and they need me as a leader, but I need them more in order to accomplish my missions. And it's important. It's not manipulation. It's important that they understand that I recognize that. It's important that not necessarily my subordinates as well, but also my peers. It's important that they understand and they recognize that I need the team, that it is a team effort. And I definitely think those were some similarities that I would have struggled with had I went a civilian path right out of college as well.
Yeah, and I'm so appreciative for you doing this talk, because I'm totally one of those people that I don't have anyone in my family anyway who served in the military, my immediate family, and so you just never really quite engage in some of those conversations sometimes to actually know, how does this work? What does leadership look like in the military? And so I found this whole thing to be really fascinating and eye-opening, that it's quite different than I think I might have assumed. But I want to ask you, when you initially set out in your military career, did you set out with the intention of, I want to be a leader, I want to continue to grow in leadership roles in the military, or did that kind of come as you grew into who you are?
Man, put me on the spot there. You're about to get me in trouble. No. No, I think when I initially joined the military as an enlisted person enlisted as a enlistment back in early 2000, it was honestly just because I didn't know what else to do. I mean, my background, for all my law enforcement degree and my MBA, I have a GED. I was kicked out of high school. So at that point, I was just looking for something to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And the military really helped guide me. I knew when I became an officer, when I went to college and I became an officer, I knew I wanted to lead soldiers. I just think I didn't fully understand what that meant. I had every ambition, as I think most junior military officers coming into the Army have, is like, hey, I want to be a platoon leader. I want to be a company commander. These are key development positions where you're with soldiers. You're doing all the fun stuff that soldiers do, that stuff you see on TV and the commercials. It ain't all that, but all that fun stuff, and everybody wants to do all that. But there's a lot of behind the scenes things that need to happen before you can get into those roles. In order to get into those roles, and there's a level of politics associated with the military that, again, I was just not prepared for, at least on the active duty side. But that's a whole other podcast. But I definitely struggled with that. I knew I wanted to be a leader. And honestly, I think I really started to shine from a leader standpoint when I transitioned from active duty to the Army Reserve. My personal journey, I will say this, Lisa, the Army Reserve has been a lot more beneficial for me insofar as gaining leadership opportunities and growing as a leader than I felt I had in active duty. A lot of reasons for that. I won't go into too much detail there, but the Army Reserve has really created, and it continues to do this, especially in my field, in the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear field. We call it CBRN. There are tremendous opportunities for young people in this field. I mean, when I came into this field enlisted, you had one or two choices. You were what we call the one of the smoke guys. So that's what I did. I was a smoke generator operator, and that doesn't even exist anymore. And then you had what we call decon and recon operations. And now the young soldiers that come out of basic training, okay, or an AIT, but by the time they report to their units, they're already they already have experiences and technical training that seasoned firefighters with 10, 15 years experience don't even have yet. Has material training, incident command training through FEMA, et cetera, all these different certifications through Homeland Security. So just amazing opportunities to work cross-functionally with civilians, with military personnel, different branches of the military. So your opportunities are abounding, and I'm definitely thankful for the Army Reserve providing those opportunities for us.
Wow, that's really incredible. Well, yeah, we'll send this out to all the high schools so they can use this as a recruiting tool as well. But as we wrap up the podcast, I just want to end on this. You know, this podcast, hopefully people who are aspiring leaders or new leaders, or, you know, even people who have been in leadership for a while are listening. But, you know, what advice would you give, or, you know, what insights have you gained that you'd like to share that we should, you know, make sure that listeners really hear this tip about leadership?
Yeah, I mean, one, don't be afraid to put yourself out there. I think that's really important. You know, I think people naturally want to share their experiences, and it's okay to ask for help. Put yourself out there. Take on tough assignments. Take on tough roles. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid to fail. You know, fail big. You know, you should be running into the wall, you know, and hope you get through it. You know, you might get knocked out the first time, but get back up. I think, you know, we have a culture that's so bent on fear of failure. It's okay. It's okay. It's what you do after you fail, how you get back up, and how you bounce back. I mean, that's what I think really drives it. So that's the first thing. You know, don't be afraid to ask for help. I wish I'd have took that advice 19 years ago in the Army. My life would have been a lot simpler. Don't be afraid to ask for help and mentorship. I think it's incumbent on young people to seek out mentorship. There, at least in my mind, as a young man, it was this, you know, idea that someone was going to reach down and pick me up and try to mentor me, and that happens sometimes. But you know, if you want to develop yourself, take the reins. It's not, you know, nothing wrong. People put their pants on one leg at a time, just like you. If you see you know, in the military, you see a lieutenant or a sergeant major or something that you admire. Hey, sergeant major, lieutenant, you know, can I get half an hour, just talk to you about my options? And I promise you, if they're worth their salt, they'll take the time and have that conversation with you. And I think the same is true in a civilian capacity. I've learned to do that in my civilian capacity. My current company is very receptive of that. I've had several conversations with our COO, you know, my manager, about my future, and I think that's important for young people. You know, have a plan, be prepared, and don't be scared to put yourself out there. Just get out there, and you know, the worst thing they can say is no. All right.
And it's not that scary after all. Well, fantastic talk, DJ. I mean, it was just fascinating to talk to you. And I feel like, again, you could be a recurring guest. I don't know if we're going to do the military and politics podcast or not. I don't want to get in trouble here, or, you know, but I feel like you could be on again and again, and we could continue to dive into some things. But I just really appreciate your time and supporting the show and sharing what you've got on leadership.
Anytime, Dr. Hartman. I definitely appreciate you asking. Anything I can do to support, just let me know.
Thanks, Major Hughes.